Hi everybody, I'm really pleased today to be joined by Stephanie Boyce and Janie Frampton about all things connected to diversity. Such an important topic, a really interesting talk today, and I hope you enjoy. What's been the driver for you both towards your greatest achievements? So let's start with yourself, Stephanie.
So I think the greatest driver for what I've achieved has been the ability to not take no for an answer. Right. Because as many of your listeners will know, that it took me 4 attempts to become president of the Law Society, but the more people told me that I couldn't was the more that I was determined that I could and would. And I think that driver, that determination, that resilience has served me well throughout my career.
So overcoming a barrier, quite a big barrier by the sound of it, and being told no you can't, made you drive further forward.
Absolutely, because I'm a firm believer. There is a passage, a biblical passage, that talks about it's not in how many times you got knocked down, it's in how you got up.
Right.
And that's exactly it. Those 4 attempts, the previous unsuccessful attempts, I don't like the word failure because it has, for me, a negative connotation to it, but those 3 previous attempts allowed me the ability to refine, to hone, to perfect my offering, to learn, to educate.
And with a positive attitude.
Absolutely, always.
And yourself, Janie?
Yes, I guess mine was all about fairness and equality of opportunity.
Right.
So when I fell in love with football at 15, it was against the social norm for a woman. Okay. And I was very naive. I couldn't see any reason why I couldn't be involved in the sport I loved. But very soon I realised there were huge barriers. And from those barriers, I learned that I either had to get over them, go round them, or it was going to stop me progressing.
As a person, what drives you? What drove you then?
It was my love of football.
Right.
My absolute passion for the game and my naivety thinking that I could just be involved with it and everybody would accept me. But football didn't want women then. They weren't ready, didn't want them, and they put every barrier in the way to make sure that we didn't progress.
Can we talk construction? So the Office of National Statistics say that 15% approximately is a female gender within that construction sector. So how do you think that the construction sector could foster a more positive view of the construction workforce? Can you start with yourself?
So absolutely. So we know that diversity is a driver of economic success. We know that businesses, organisations, where there is diversity, they are more successful, they are more productive. And trying to get that message across in an inclusive way. So it's not my rights at the exclusion of other people's rights. It's about fostering an inclusive culture where everyone, regardless of their characteristic, their protected characteristic, whether that's around sexuality, age, gender, disability, religion and so forth, where everyone feels included and they have the opportunity to thrive, to be the best that they can be. So the only determinants to success is not your characteristic, but your ability, your skills, your aptitude. They should be the determinants.
Do you think understanding the types of roles in construction should start at school?
I think there's a big education gap around loads of our, whether it's construction, whether it's the law, financial professional services. There is a big gap, and around educating individuals for those who go into the sectors, for those who are already in the sectors, and the type of work that's involved in these sectors. And I think some people write themselves off because it's still very much seen, the construction industry, as a masculine industry.
So what advice, Janie, could you give if you're a construction or a new home builder employer and you're thinking, send me some bricklayers, they've got to be men, and their heads are saying men, how would you advise people to think differently?
I think the first thing you have to do is you have to look at the competence for the job. And I think almost prior to that, you have to look at your marketing strategies and your advertising strategies, and you have to make them really friendly to the diverse, particularly gender. So women feel that it is an environment for them, and it's not just a male-dominated environment. And if they were fortunate enough to get a job within the construction industry, that they would feel that they belong and it would be an inclusive environment.
Do you think young girls would think about that type of career, or is it going back into education, so it's making people aware what roles are available in the right way?
I think many things come down to education. Many things come down to when young people are making those decisions. you know, around sort of 14, 15, where they're thinking about their options. And why would they not want to enter the construction industry? It has a great deal to offer, any gender. So as long as I think the construction industry makes those roles interesting to women, then I think
accessible.
Then I think there has to be a more sort of a focus on equality of opportunity.
Do you think a vehicle could be apprenticeships potentially?
Absolutely. We know, and certainly we've seen, you know, the approach that's been taken by the legal profession towards solicitor apprenticeships. Why not have the ability to earn whilst you learn? And you know, and you're in work, you're gaining that experience. And one of the issues I championed was around teaching law in schools, and that was around two issues: access to justice, which was enabling people to know when to recognise they have a legal issue, the earlier the better, but also around social mobility. It's creating the awareness around when to access these professions, when to find out. So I was second year at university before I found out about what I needed to achieve in order to be successful in a legal career. And in my mind, the earlier we're able to expose young people to these different options, these different ways of learning, the better.
Recently we attended a Bathroom Manufacturers Association conference, and there was a great couple of speakers who were talking about the importance of diversity in the workplace. And looking around the audience, you could quite clearly see that some people found it quite uncomfortable to talk about this. So what sort of advice or solutions could you offer a business to encourage a conversation? So let's start with yourself, Jane.
I think sometimes people are scared to start that conversation, and that comes from a lack of knowledge. And we know that it's ever evolving, the areas of ED&I. We know this, and people are scared that if they start the conversation, they're not going to say the correct things. I would say really clearly, seek some education on it, seek some development on it. So at least, even though it's ever evolving, you'll have a really good starting place and a place of knowledge, and then you can take that forward with your experience.
So potentially some external support.
For sure, because there are industry experts out there, and I think it's really important that if you're not sure how to start the conversation or how to continue that conversation, you do need to get that industry expert.
Okay. Any advice perhaps you could offer, Steph?
Well, absolutely. Industry experts is a great one, and of course Janie and I are always on hand to help. But not talking about it is not an excuse to do nothing about it. It's absolutely right, and to build on everything that Janie has said, that we shouldn't be uncomfortable talking about diversity. And a reminder, because I come across this lots. When we talk about diversity, people seem to think that we're talking about one thing, and that seems to evolve around race. Diversity is a whole rainbow mirage of different characteristics, and some that, of course, is protected under the Equality Act, some which are not, but we value as a characteristic, because we are aware of the diverse nature of individuals who bring their different experiences and attributes to the value and diversity of our businesses and lives.
Do you feel that some employers might avoid a diverse culture because of the complications they would perceive could be an issue, and actually having a diverse culture or a diverse workplace is very, very smart?
Look, one of the things that we hear lots about is about culture. That we're not sure that if we recruit X, that they will fit into our culture. We've got a nice, niche business here, it's a family business, and therefore we don't want to upset that. That in itself is not a reason why not to embrace diversity. And also,
so being too comfortable almost is a bad thing sometimes.
Absolutely, because the whole point is you have to make sure that you're working and operating within the confines of the law of England and Wales, and make sure that you're not operating out of that you're not excluding people because of those perceived or unperceived characteristics that you value or think are valuable to your business. You have to make sure that you're operating in an inclusive way, and not only to the people that you bring into your business, but the people you interact with on a daily basis. Okay.
So we're all different people. Which discrimination do you feel is more apparent with most employers when recruiting staff? So Stephanie.
It's an interesting question. Whilst I don't have statistics in front of me to suggest what particular characteristic may be more susceptible to discrimination, and I'm sure that I could perhaps hazard a guess. What I know is that disability and colleagues from the LGBT community are not sufficiently represented in spaces. Because if I take, for instance, the law, what we do know is that 63% on entry are female, as opposed to, and 53% of practicing solicitors are female, and 35% of private practice, 18% from a minority ethnic background.
Well, we said 15% in construction.
Absolutely. And construction tends to do, in terms of LGBT communities and disability, does better than the law, because the law is around 2% for LGBT and around 3%, I think, for disability. So the construction industry is doing better, but of course, what we're not seeing is across those professions, whether it's in construction, law, or financial services, is that all of that diversity replicated into the senior parts of those industries.
But if you understand that, if you had to pick one, I'll ask Janie the same thing shortly, which one would you pick?
I think it's socioeconomic background.
Right, okay. Just want to explain for the people watching or listening what that means?
So absolutely. So we have a preference in this country in terms of we value where somebody has been educated, how they've been educated. We value their accents, where they might live, where they come from, a postcode lottery if you like. And we have a notion, if you like, about that north and south divide, that if you don't come from a particular background, it means that you are less than. And if I look at my own situation, coming from a low socioeconomic background, lots of assumptions were made about the type of leader that I would be, much of which was wrong, but it was about some of those stereotypes, those biases that people had, conscious and unconscious, about what they think a leader should look and sound like.
Okay, and Janie, if you had to pick one, which would it be?
I had two in my head,
That's a question.
but you've narrowed it down. For me, it would have to be women in the construction industry.
From your own experiences, of course, so that would be
for sure,
one,
because it's quite a male-dominated environment. That there's a natural perception that women wouldn't be strong enough to do a lot of the jobs in construction. And my other one would have been age, because again, the same perception. But I think women took the edge because very much they see physically that women are not as strong as men and therefore can't do the same job. It's a perception. Until they test that perception, they're not going to really know the outcome for sure.
And going back to having a diverse skill set in a workplace or a business, having a more balanced demographic is obviously a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely, it's a win-win-win. And until businesses, those who run businesses, understand and recognise that, then we're the poorer for it.
Okay. Can you just both give me some reasons why an employer should absolutely think about not discounting older people in the workforce?
Because they don't know what they're discounting.
Okay.
Because you don't know that one person measures up against another person of the same age. We are all as different on the inside as we are on the outside. So I think don't assume that because you are past 50, for example, that physically you're still not able to do some of the more manual jobs in the construction industry. It might be the jobs are not so manual and therefore a 50-plus-year-old could do that job equally as well as a 20-something-year-old. So we've got to stop these stereotypes of age and what age represents within the construction industry.
Yeah, and yourself, Stephanie?
Well, I think much of the same. In terms of we need to, whether you're on the younger age of the spectrum or the older age of the spectrum, there is room for everyone. Everybody has a contribution, and that shouldn't be defined. And it shouldn't be defined by ageism, but we do have an issue in our society. We have a structure that tells us that when we get to a certain age, we're no longer valuable in the employability sector because you're expected to retire. We have a structure that is built around, if you look at trying to get mortgages or credit, there are certain cut-offs depending on your age. So as a society, we need to think about all of those things put in the mix and actually how we view those and value those as a society.
So as an industry, we talk about apprenticeships and driving younger people into our sector. It hasn't got to be young people doing an apprenticeship, of course, it hasn't got to be that. But what are the tangible benefits of a more senior, more experienced member of staff?
Well, I can think about what the benefits are when, certainly throughout my career, when I was embarking upon this journey, I did lots of volunteering. And of course it wasn't, in my gift, it wasn't the thing to do at that time. But what it allowed me to do was sit next to some of the best legal minds that this country had to offer.
Yeah,
I got to learn from them. Yes. I got to hear from them.
So you were coached.
Absolutely. Without I certainly would not
that was happening.
Absolutely. And that's the value. And apprenticeships, We see this in law all the time. I had a lady contact me the other day, 65 years of age. She'll be, I think, 69 by the time she finishes her apprenticeship. It is an absolute...
wonderful.
It's a door that's open to every and anyone. It's not just confined for our youngsters, but of course we appreciate that more young people may be choosing to go into that. But we also see people going into second careers who embark upon apprenticeships.
So Janie, tangible benefits for a more senior member of the staff?
Yes, I think it's the knowledge and experience they bring.
Yes.
We focus a lot on soft skills, social skills, social awareness skills that we try and embed into young people to make them really fit for the employment market. Now, the older person comes with those because they've got those life skills already that are going to help
solution.
them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They've already got those life skills to bring into the role. So why would you throw that away, the option of throwing that away, when you can absolutely use that in your diverse workforce?
Great, very well put. So how can a more diverse workforce drive innovation into a business? So Janie first.
Yes, I think that the more diverse your workforce, the more chance of innovation you have.
Right.
So we have to flip that question because you get different ideas, different views, different values, different cultures, different experiences. Why would you not embrace all of that you can bring into your industry and create innovation?
Do you have an example perhaps you'd like to share where there's been a change because of a diverse workforce?
Yeah, I guess in my environment, bringing women in, we find that very often women have a different tolerance level, certainly within refereeing in football, and that tolerance level actually calms situations better. And that's not saying that we're better than our male colleagues, it's not, it's just that we bring a totally different angle to it and different skills and the softer skills. And that in itself is always going to be better for football. That can also be better for the construction industry, which currently is very male dominated.
What about with women in mind? What about respect? Let's look at the football pitch and look in a business environment.
I think you earn respect. In whichever environment you're in, you have to earn that respect. I had to earn it on the football field, I had to earn it as a referee, and I also had to earn it as a woman referee. So I had a twofold. But in industry, it's the same. De-genderise whatever the role is in the construction industry and look at what respect that individual needs or has earned or you feel that should be given freely. But respect is a real big key issue, and that is totally gender neutral.
I think I was more going back to the comment about the softer skills that women tend to possess. How do you find that helps in both those situations?
And I'm going to be probably quite controversial now, because in football, a lot of the players would show more respect or would apologise for their behaviour after the game because they have their mother in mind or their wife in mind or their daughter in mind. And some would say to me, sorry about the language, ref, I wouldn't have used that, you know, had my wife been here or my mother had been here. And it's nice that they recognise that. So that is their natural values and behaviours of life, that they recognise that.
If you look back over the last 20 years, do you think that employers are generally offering more equal opportunities? Stephanie first.
It's an interesting question you pose. What we saw after the abhorrent events in America around the death of George Floyd, we saw this outpouring of lots of initiatives centred around wanting to do better around diversity. There were lots of high-profile recruits, lots of statements coming out saying as to what the various organisations and companies were going to do. Fast forward a couple of years, and what we've now seen, you know, we've got the ruling in SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of America, around universities not being able to recruit for, you know, they've had to change their recruitment criteria around because they found it to be unconstitutional to give preference to certain demographics of those that they recruit. We've seen and a fear that we've had a rollback when it comes to diversity. We've seen some high exit, those who were recruited to deal with diversity have been let go, and around Netflix and around Disney.
Right.
So there are some
These are champions of diversity that are perhaps in those positions to try and make it a better place to be. Yeah.
Absolutely. Verna Myers being one of those around, was she Netflix? I think she was Netflix that we spoke about earlier. High profile individuals who've been let go.
Why do you think that is, Stephanie?
Well, what's really interesting is the American press, you know, and the LA Times had a stark headline that suggested that lots of the hiring was done for PR purposes,
Right.
and that actually it was just a tick box exercise. And we hear lots of that actually lots of these initiatives, lots of these statements, these policies are about tick boxes. And we've heard other things that have been thrown into the mix. Whatever companies do, they must do so with authenticity, because you will lose the will of workers, your clients, and so forth, and respect throughout the industry. If you're not absolutely wedded to what you say you're going to do, and you absolutely live by those values, and those values should be clear, they should be visible, they should be in your mission statement, in your vision statement, somewhere where people can see those.
So back 20 years to where we are today, is it better, the same, or indifferent? The number of equality opportunities that employers are offering?
Well, look, I mean, we've got the Equality Act 2010 that immersed a number of legislation, around race and around disability and so forth into one. So we've had that since 2010 or thereafter. What we have seen is, we've seen progress. There's no doubt that we've seen progress. The fact that I became the first person of colour president of the Law Society in its almost 200-year history, we've seen progress. But we haven't seen enough. And so there is a lot more to be done. And so anybody who thinks that we have got to where we need to get to is wrong. That one of the things that I love about Britain, this country that I was born in, is around the diversity, the richness, the melting pot that we pride ourselves on. And we must not lose sight of that.
So we're a lot better off, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely.
Janie, where do you think we are with this? If you go back in your career 20 years ago to where you are today, yourself personally, you've overcome your own hurdles, but have you also helped other people?
I'd like to think so. I totally concur with what Stephanie says. We have come a long way. We've got an awful lot further to go, and let's not take our foot off that pedal, because if we do, we will remain static. And yes, I'd like to think that being a role model and an advocate has hugely benefited a lot of our women, and I hope I still am, because I do champion them when things are not fair or just. So I think, also picking up on Stephanie's point, positive discrimination on the underrepresented groups is not effective. It sets that underrepresented group back such a long way. Because you have to be authentic, you have to be credible in whatever role you're undertaking, whether it be in law, sport or construction. Authenticity is key, is vital.
So people need to relate to what's being said or heard. Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely. And as I say, we have a legislative framework in this country around which, if people are in doubt, that they can reference. And of course they can always seek advice around it.
Or challenge.
Or challenge. The whole point is, are you an active bystander or are you a bystander?
And that's a very good point. A hiring manager is setting out to take on a member of staff. So what advice could you offer that hiring manager not to hire on personal or even some hidden bias?
That's a really good question, and this has been talked about an awful lot in recent years. And that bias also comes into what we call the code. So you tend to hire in your own likeness, or your own hobbies, or your own habits.
Yes, because it's comfortable.
You're comfortable, your own social background. You sit in that comfort zone. Now, stepping outside of that comfort zone, you have to be very strong and aware of what you're stepping into. And that's what we want people to do, because the reason why we have 84% of board members in this country are white male, it's because constantly we're hiring in their own likeness. I'm not saying this is a negative, I'm saying it's an unconscious bias. So you need to step outside of that. You need to look at the credibility and the competence of those you're hiring, and not whether you like cricket, they like cricket. So these are the things that you have to change, not because they came from the same school, not because they were privately educated, not because they have the same social standing. So all of those things have to, you need to just park all of that.
But whose responsibility is it to educate?
Well, it's everybody's responsibility, individually and collectively. If a hiring manager is in a space where they are recruiting, one would hope that they have been trained and adequately equipped with the necessary tools to do their job effectively. And if I look at this from a risk perspective, for the business to ensure that the risks are not sufficient enough, that the business is held to account and may
So, without being too political, is government more responsible, and do they do enough?
I think it goes back to this space. Absolutely, there is a space and place for government to legislate in this space, and of course they have legislated in this space. What we're talking about is when it comes down to an individual. And if I was a business owner and I had handed over the remit, the responsibility to an individual to hire, I would expect that I have sufficiently trained them to recognise some of those biases that they may have within themselves, to recognise differences in other people and celebrate those differences, recognise how those differences contribute to the richness of our business.
If I had to pin you both down for a number, what percentage of hiring managers do you think absolutely understand what a bias means? To have 100%, Steph, what percentage of managers would you say truly understand this conversation we're just having now?
Well, I don't know, but it goes back to this, that absolutely we can pluck a figure out of the air and talk about what percentage we believe or don't believe, but there are things that we can do.
Is it high?
I would suspect that bias is interpreted differently by different people, depending on the space you're in, the business you're in, and so forth. And it's about the rights and wrongs of it. So my suggestion is that if individuals are properly trained, they understand the mission, the vision of the company, the ethos of the company. What are your values that you want to impart? Who are the people that you're bringing in? And what does your culture say about your business? Good.
So, Janie, I'm going to ask you this number. So, of 100%, what percentage do you think people actually truly understand the word bias in a hiring process?
I think it'd be low.
Oh.
I do think it'd be quite low. And again, I wouldn't want to put a number on it. But I think people who understand their own bias and how bias affects their hiring, I think that would be quite a low percentage. And that's why training and education is so important.
The vast majority don't understand it.
They don't understand the bias because of what we're seeing. If you look at the outcomes of 84% of boards in this country, senior boards, are white men, they're not understanding it.
And of course you've got the regulator, the Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator of financial services in this country, who have mandated around 40% target for female board recruitment, and another figure, at least one senior figure on the board must be from an ethnic minority community background, and so forth. Surely we shouldn't be in a position where a regulator is mandating and we still don't know how effective it will be and how successful it will be, and it may serve as a template for other regulators to follow. But the point is, there's a recognition that we're not doing enough, and in order to get us to where we should be, because our businesses, our professions should be reflective of the society they seek to serve. And currently, we know, based on the figure that Janie's just given to us, that is not the case.
So a long way to go.
Long way to go.
Long way to go.
Obviously, we do recruitment here, so I have to ask this question. So if there was a hiring manager and they were in the interview process, what could and couldn't they say to uncover the hidden diversity of some individual?
Well, this in itself is a skill. The first starting point is it relevant? What is it that you're trying to get at? You know, are you just asking the question for the sake of asking that question, and you're going to use the information that you glean to exclude someone on the basis of the answer they're given? On another side, is it relevant to that job? So it goes back to the job description. It goes back to what is it that you are trying to achieve? And if you're asking a question and you cannot justify, if challenged, why that question is being asked, my suggestion is you don't. You need to be creative in as much that, you know, training, again, it's about education. Educating people is around the questions they should ask. And it's around the job, it's around the individual's skills. Personal questions like, do you have children? Are you married? You know, there are certain questions that will permit you, because as an employer, you are responsible to know whether or not a preferred candidate has the eligibility, the right to work in the United Kingdom. So you can ask questions around that. But but questions around, are you married, around child, and so forth, they are not questions that are currently permitted.
So we're saying, go back to the brief. Is the brief match the person you see in terms of the actual requirements of that job? And actually, by uncovering personal information, we'll create potentially more bias. That's what we're saying.
There's a potential there, because it's what you do with it. So the questions that you're being asked, does it pertain? Is it relevant to the person's ability to do that job? So, you know, if you ask a woman, how many children have you got? Are you asking the same of a man who comes through the door, or any other candidate that comes through the door? What is your end point for asking that question? Is it relevant, and is it right?
Janie, any do's and don'ts in the interview process for yourself?
Yeah, I think I would look at the protected characteristics.
Right.
Some that you can see clearly, but then I think any questions outside of what you can see are the ones you avoid.
Right.
Because I think that's not relevant to the job. And like Stephanie says, they can only be relevant to the job, not relevant to you as an individual. Because those are the ones, for me, you're asking the question purposely to try and eliminate that individual from the process.
And what's the process, Stephanie, in terms of a challenge?
Challenge? Well, it depends, because if you're asking, it depends on the question, it depends on the context in which it's being asked. And if it can't be justified, and it's about how it's received by the person, because that is what it's about most of the time. It's about how is it received, not how it's given. But an individual has recourse. There's a legal framework that the individual would have recourse to if they felt that because of a protected characteristic, and of course there are 9 of those under the Equality Act 2010, 9 of those, if they felt that they had not been given a job or an interview or a fair chance at a job because of some of that questioning that then related back to one of those protected characteristics.
I would imagine there's still some employers who may say, can I ask you how old you are?
Absolutely, we get that all the time. There are some individuals who still put their date of birth, marriage status on their curriculum vitae, on their CV.
Which is very 20 years ago. Yeah.
Absolutely, but there are still a lot of people who do that. Some schools, unfortunately, still teach children that they put their name and address and all sorts. And that brings up all different risk around absolutely data and privacy and so forth. It has to be, again, if you are, depending on the setting, you know, is it relevant that for you to know what the age of that person is? There are some jobs where absolutely, if you're hiring and you're in an industry where you have to be over 18 years of age to work in that environment, and you suspect that an individual may not be 18 or over, then of course it's relevant for you to ask that question. But as I said, you've got to be able to justify that, or you may find yourself in a tribunal.
Right. Let's look at some real life examples, because we can learn from real life examples. So have you got an example that you both experienced or witnessed where the organisation or culture has changed their hiring process to conclude more of a diverse background, where the actual end result's been much, much better? So Stephanie first.
Absolutely. So again, if we look at the legal profession, 23% of senior partners who've been professionally educated, as opposed to 7% of the wider UK population. But I was absolutely proud as president the way that we mobilised ourselves as a profession around the issue of social mobility. Okay. And we've seen a number of initiatives, not just only around social mobility, but around diversity, whether that's gender inequality, whether it's around disability, LGBTQ+, race and so forth. But that recognition that whilst we've done lots and greater initiatives, including apprenticeships, to get people into these industries, to make them more accessible, we still have
from more diverse backgrounds.
From more diverse backgrounds. People, you know, the number of people who said, thinking about the law, they don't want people like me in the law. So we've done lots around that to ensure and enable people and empower people to put themselves forward to be in that space, because we value the diversity of thought, the richness that we can be harnessed and that it brings to our business. Okay. But a recognition that whilst lots has been done, so much more needs to be done. And there is lots more for us to do. I still long for the time when we're no longer talking about barriers, because there are none in our way.
Absolutely. Can we have a football example, Janie?
I'm not going to give you a football one, but I am going to give you a sports one. Okay. So I've just I finished a 2-year contract with a major sport in the UK, and we needed to hire, it was all a structural change that we were implementing and governance, and we needed to hire 4 professional officials for the top end of their game. Good contracts, a lot of money. And when they wrote the job description, it totally excluded the only woman that had an opportunity to apply for it.
Good grief, almost written to do that.
I would say it was not a conscious bias. No. However, so I guess...
Circumstance, let's call it.
Circumstance. My first point would be, to any industry, and particularly the construction industry, which is quite male, please make sure that you write job descriptions that they are very open and transparent and apply equal opportunity.
Yeah. Is there some wording that people could be using that's more
There is a lot of wording out there,
rounded?
and good HR
Yeah.
would know.
Yeah.
So what we did with this, we saw this advert and we said, I'm sorry, you can't send that out. Because that disadvantages the only woman in that list who could apply. And they said, but she hasn't done enough games to warrant her applying,
Right.
because we've said you have to do X amount of games at that level. And I said, but she's only not done those games because you haven't appointed her. So now you're disadvantaging her twice. So we had that
That was
amended.
a challenge by the sound of it.
Oh, we challenged.
That was a challenge. Yeah.
It was a huge challenge because all of a sudden, in a very, very male environment, we brought in this challenge to say, this is not equality of opportunity. She has no chance to apply. So they rewrote the job description. It went out. A very, very robust application process, and she came through as the
It
fourth.
was back to square one. Then the result was the
Yeah,
result.
and
the best
she
person for the job.
and the best
Yeah.
person for the job,
Yeah.
because the
Yeah.
system was so robust that she got there on her own volition because
Her
she
own
was
merit,
given the
yeah.
opportunity.
Yeah. We're really passionate here about apprenticeships. We spoke about apprenticeships earlier on. So what are the direct benefits, do you think, of an employer hiring an apprentice, whether they be younger, whether they be older as an individual? Janie first?
Yeah, I'm a strong believer in apprenticeships. And we started a whole process way back about people from officiating going into apprenticeships with clubs. And it worked well, didn't take off as well as we would like, because I think we got to the point where the employer was often saying, what was in it for me? But actually, we flipped that and
why
said...
have I got to pay for it? That's
Yeah,
it, almost.
and we sort of flipped that and said, look, this young person is learning all of these skills on the job, with their football, with their officiating, transferable skills to the workplace and to their personal lives, of which you will benefit. And lots of other benefits that we said, you know, for your academies, you now didn't have to find referees, therefore you didn't have to pay on a Wednesday afternoon when the academy games were played. And we started to spell out all the benefits they couldn't see, as well as having really good qualified young people evolving through their academy structures. And that also then became role models for the younger people coming down, because I'm also a strong believer
That's a good point.
that the role models shouldn't necessarily be much older people. They need to be those that have only just gone through the process.
Yeah, it's more relevant, isn't it?
It's more relevant,
Yeah,
and it's so
absolutely,
fresh.
Yes,
And they really understand the time and the climate in which they're coming through.
Stephanie, direct benefits of apprenticeships?
Well, direct benefits of apprenticeships is that ability to learn on the job from day one. And we've heard so much around the quality of candidates that are being put through apprenticeships and coming out at the other end. But of course, you know, we've heard from lots of schools around the cost of living crisis and lots of students not wanting to go to university in order to come out of university with a huge debt, as they would, some of them. So apprenticeships gives that alternative to those large debts, but the ability that actually you are learning, you're earning, and you get a qualification at the end of it.
What do you both do? University?
University.
But that was absolutely university, but that was at an age and a time. That, again, we seem to have gone...
And that's just it, isn't it?
Absolutely.
An age and a time,
Yeah.
Not now, I don't think. I think
I think there's a change, yeah?
massive change. The amount of people
We
I've
wouldn't have
spoken
been able to afford it.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was the recipient of a maintenance grant, but you know, and I didn't have to pay tuition fees. I couldn't afford where would I get £9,000 from? You know, coming from a low socio-economic background. So we're seeing lots of that, but the quality that your employer will pay for you to learn all of those things and on-the-job training, and you get a wage, because lots of people coming from low socio-economic backgrounds they have caring responsibilities, they have dependents, so it all helps.
Earn while you learn.
And they need to add to the family purse often, you know, in today's climate. And more and more
That's
hearing...
a good point. That's a very good point, yeah.
More and more I'm hearing of young people who are finding apprenticeships as the best option.
There's a stat that says there's even more 18-year-olds in the market for employment now. Actually, there's a limited number of university placements, so...
Well, and the other thing, we've got a crisis in our universities anyway. We've got more and more spaces because of the funding structure. More and more spaces are going to international students where the fees are higher, which means that it's more income coming in.
That's true. Do you have any advice of how we can encourage less privileged or more minority groups to go into more professional careers? So Janie, can you give a short
I think
answer?
this comes to how we promote it in the first place.
Okay.
I don't know how we can prevent more privileged people going into some of these
Yes.
professions,
Yes.
but we want to encourage more people from
But how do we do? How do we do this?
And it's about how you market it. Do you market it in schools? Do you take it to schools? Stephanie said before about taking law into schools when they're about 14 as an option, because most people wouldn't think it's an option for them. And I think this is what we need to do. We need to spell out the options much wider, much younger, in order for people
So
to
careers,
realise that
opportunities, what actually jobs are there out there? What can you do?
It's about knowledge.
Yeah.
It's about information. And if you come from, it's about that cultural currency that we talk lots about. People not having access to the information. And I spoke about my second year at university before I knew about some of those things. And when I talk about teaching law in schools and around social mobility, it's about from an early age thinking about the stepping stones, the roadmap that we have to set out in order to navigate as we navigate our way through the educational system, the courses that we have to do, the universities that we apply to, because we know that certain industries have a liking for particular universities.
the code.
And absolutely, access to work experience, those all-important networks that work experience, sponsorship, mentorship are all drawn from.
But
And
to your knowledge, though, who is training the careers advisors? Is that happening enough?
well, unfortunately, under successive governments, we've seen less and less career advisors where they should be, i.e. in the school, and we've seen them not so accessible. We need proper investment across lots of industries, including in career advisors, including in schools, because we have a deficiency in this country. If you are privately educated, we've got institutions out there, private institutions, that are training individuals, giving them that confidence, giving them that public speaking, to go out there and take those opportunities, and if they don't take them, to demand why those opportunities aren't for them. But we don't always have the same structure playing out in state schools. We don't always get exposed. We were talking about this the other day. When I was in school, the dreaded recorder, that we were all forced to play, the violin, you don't have, to the best of my knowledge, limited schools have that these days. We do not have equity across the state school system, and if you're privately educated, as I said, especially in the law, 23% as opposed to 7% of the UK population. We don't have equity in lots of things across the board, whether that's education, whether that's housing, health, and so forth. And we have to narrow the gaps.
I mean, I think, to my understanding, there's a missing a trick situation here where there should be more investment into schools and providing this information.
Absolutely. And why are we not, for instance, why are we not teaching our children valuable, there's so many lessons that you can get from reading music. The discipline of music, or teaching them an instrument, the responsibility of carrying it, looking after it, and so forth. All of those things. So when we talk about, that ageism and stepping back 20 years, when I was in school not so long ago, we had the nurse who came round and checked you for head lice, the dentist, all of the hearing nurse, all of those people who came into school, as well as milk, all of those things that you were given, but they built you for the life ahead of you, if you like.
Do we both feel that the subjects of diversity is discussed or written about in the trade press enough, Janie?
No. I think
It's a
it's very
quick no.
simple.
Yeah.
It's a really quick no. It depends on the trade, of course, but in the more the trades around construction industry, absolutely not. We go back previously to it's a difficult conversation, and lots of people do not like difficult
shy away from
conversations,
writing about
so they
it, yeah.
shy away from it. It's outside of their comfort zone. They don't know enough about it. Therefore, we don't see or read or know or understand enough within the male-dominated environments.
Stephanie?
We've seen a seismic shift.
Right.
In certain industries, like Janie said, there's been a seismic shift. But of course, if you look at, there was a study that was done in the law around, and it's called the 1% study by Extents, and that out of 13,433 partners in 10 or more partner firms in some of the largest global firms that our country has to offer, only 90 partners are black, hence why it's called the 1% study. So there's lots more to be done, and of course we don't have the statistics around, and probably do have a statistic somewhere around female, around disability, from those who have declared what their protected characteristic is. There's a lot more, as I keep saying this, and I can't say this enough, there has been a seismic shift,
Yeah.
but the representation isn't there. And if we look at the judiciary, for instance, diversity of the judiciary, the Law Society did a report, and it will take 121 years till 2149 until we see the representation of the judiciary reflect the society it is seeking to serve. That cannot continue in a society such as ours.
As a solution then, should there be, talking about the trade press again, should there be more case studies?
I think case studies is a good start, but I do think it is about education and training. It's about, and this is not just about construction or law or sport. This is very relevant across very many male-dominated environments.
Give me an example
business.
of that training, Janie. What sort of training do you mean? Explain what you mean.
I think it's breaking down the barriers. Breaking down the barriers in all of the corrected the characteristic protected characteristics. Sorry, but it's also about breaking down the barriers of people being comfortable to speak out and comfortable to say, I don't know the answers. And it's about that training around all of these areas of diversity and how we should be moving forward. Everybody's scared. They're running scared. I hear it every day.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say anymore.
Yeah.
Well, none of us do, but there's an ever-evolving language and characteristics that we need to display.
Yeah. How many training providers are there that offer diversity training?
Well, look, we have a joke between us. There are absolutely lots of...
Are we in the hundreds?
Well, gosh,
Number of training providers?
I was somewhere the other day, and I think somebody quoted about the millions of different research and surveys that have been done in this space.
Okay.
And even if you took a quarter of that, of the number of diversity practitioners, experts, providers in that space. And the joke between us is that there's lots of people in that space. Some who are doing it really well, and some who are doing it badly.
So it's a small investment then for an employer to consider some external support, given the benefits of a more inclusive environment or the challenge that may come for not being that way.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think moving on from that, I think it's really important that you don't just tick boxes. We want employers to genuinely buy in,
Believe in it,
and
understand
believe in
it.
it, that the diverse workforce will be better for them. There's lots of research out there that shows the productivity of companies when they have a diverse workforce. So why wouldn't we want to embrace it?
So a company's mantra is to make profit, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, absolutely, and there's nothing wrong with that, but at the end of the day, you have to make sure that you do it in the most equitable, diverse and inclusive way.
Yeah. If everything's working for you, and then take your last couple of words there, it's the most efficient way, isn't it? Yeah.
Efficient, effective.
So in what you just said there, Stephanie, it's the most efficient way to make that profit.
Well, absolutely, but efficiency doesn't always cut it, because if you're working efficiently but you're not working equitably or you're not working inclusively and you don't have the diversity, then you may still find yourself coming undone.
Back onto recruitment, what advice could you offer a hiring manager or an employer on how to advertise to encourage diversity into the applications?
My first thing is, if you really want diversity, make sure your marketing materials are correct. So I can remember once in football, I was showing this fabulous piece of marketing, and they said, we're going to try and get more women into assessing and instructors, tutors. And I said, fabulous. I looked at all the marketing materials, all white men.
Right.
How are you going to get women to say, that looks like
obvious.
me?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, that's an unconscious move, but we need to make sure that that doesn't happen and that we do get the marketing materials right, the target market right, so you market it in places where your diversity will be.
Yes.
Through community leaders, if you want ethnic minorities.
Yes.
Through places where women go.
Yes.
So where do women go? They go to schools, they go to gyms, they go to other places where they can actually see this, or websites or social media, which is targeting women or to ethnic minorities. Start to think differently.
Stephanie, job advertising for you?
Well, absolutely. Look at the language. If I looked at your website, do I see me working at your organisation? Is your language speaking to me? Is it being done in a way that that resonates with me.
Yes.
And that's what's important for lots of people. We hear lots now, especially amongst millennials, Gen Z, and all sorts, that actually they're looking at your website.
Yes, that's
they're
a good
looking
example,
at
yeah.
your policies, your ESG policies.
Yeah.
And if they can't see, or it doesn't align with them,
Yes.
it doesn't matter what you're offering them,
Yeah.
they're not going to come and work.
So if you look at somebody's website, and quite clearly it's middle-aged white men only across the whole website.
What does that say about your
organisation? What does that say about the organisation? Absolutely. That's great advice. Can you both relay a really good story, really positive story, that we can all learn from, where diversity has absolutely worked?
Well, if we look at this great country, diversity has worked. We have one of the most diverse cabinets that we have seen in our history, in our political history. We have to, as previous politicians have said, we have to get Britain working for the many and not for the few. And one of my most favourite quotes is from a great diversity and inclusion champion, Verna Myers, where she talks about, to steal Janie's favourite, she talks about diversity as being invited to the party, but inclusion is being asked to dance. I have said on a number of occasions, it is not enough to give a diverse colleague a seat at the table if you're not going to allow their voice to be heard. It's important that if you invite people into the room, you ensure that they are heard, that they are valued, and they feel included.
Example from yourself, Jane?
I'm going to give you a football example, if I may.
Fantastic.
So in 2006, FIFA banned the wearing of hijab in football. And FIFA have their logo, and under the logo their strapline, Football for All.
Right.
Now, in 2011, Prince Ali bin Hussein of Jordan created a round table group from around the world, of which I was very fortunate to be a part of, to try and evidence enough to overturn the ban. Because 650,000 women of footballing age in the world would have to compromise their culture to play football. So we had the legal experts, I was in as an expert on the laws of the game, and we managed to overturn the ban. And by the summer of 2012, which I'm delighted to ever announce, the wearing of hijab came into football.
That's an enormous change.
And I was just beside myself at being involved in that, because they tried to say it was religious, and you're not allowed to wear anything that's a religious symbol in football, it's in the laws of the game. But I had to come from the point that it wasn't religious, it was cultural. And so we overturned the ban in June 2012, and now we see always now, wherever we go in World Cups and other championship competitions, where women are playing wearing hijab.
Fantastic.
I think it's also important to point out that you're going to perhaps be dealing with customers and clients who are not based in the jurisdiction of England and Wales. There are countries in Europe where you cannot talk about. So, for instance, I came across this in Belgium when I was out there working, where religious symbols, you cannot be called to the bar, the bench if you like, to become a lawyer with a religious symbol. So that means anybody wearing a hijab, a cross, a turban, any of those things will not be called. I hope that those organisations are working on those measures that restrict individuals, but of course, historically, there are countries where you cannot talk about diversity, but you have to find creative ways to talk about it and deal with it.
Fantastic. I, Stephanie Boyce, Janie Frampton, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We really hope you've liked the discussion today with Stephanie and Janie. If you've liked what you've seen today, you can hit the like button. If you'd like to subscribe for future notifications, hit the bell icon, and we do like to see comments, so please leave your comments below. Thank you for watching.